Love in Uniform, a girl's untold story. But the last thing Nadia ever expected to find at her father's funeral was the soldier who had broken her heart 3 years ago, standing at the edge of the grave in full uniform, tears streaming silently down his face, holding the folded flag that should have been hers to receive. She had told herself she was over him. She had rehearsed that lie so many times that it had almost started to feel like the truth. But the moment she saw Captain Arjun Malhotra standing there in the cold, November wind, jaw tight, eyes red, she realized that some wounds don't heal. They just go quiet, waiting for the right moment to tear open again. Her father, Colonel Suresh Verma, had served 32 years in the Indian Army. He was the kind of man who believed that duty came before everything, before birthday dinners, before school plays, before his daughter's tears, and certainly before her love life. He had never approved of Arjun, not because Arjun was a bad man, but because he believed that two soldiers could not build a home together, that the army would always claim the better part of them both, leaving nothing whole for each other. And so, in the way that strong-willed fathers sometimes do, he had made his disapproval known in ways that were quiet and devastating, until Nadia and Arjun's relationship had simply collapsed under the weight of silence and distance. That was 3 years ago. And now here they were, standing on opposite sides of a grave, with nothing but grief and years of unsaid words between them. But Nadia had joined the army not to rebel against her father, but because she genuinely believed in something larger than herself. She had watched him leave every winter in his pressed uniform, seen the way his shoulders straightened when he wore it, and felt the strange, proud ache of loving someone the nation also claimed. She had grown up understanding sacrifice before she understood algebra. She knew what the knock on the door at midnight meant. She had rehearsed how to be brave for that moment her entire childhood, not knowing that when it finally came, no amount of rehearsal would be enough. She had been posted in Siashan when the call came. The satellite phone crackled, and her commanding officer had spoken, with the careful gentleness reserved for the worst kind of news. By the time she reached home, 2 flights, a military convoy, and a 6-hour drive through the mountains, her father was already gone. There had been no goodbye. There never is for army families. That is the unspoken cost etched into every medal, every certificate of bravery, every folded flag. She stood at the funeral in her own uniform now, rigid and straight the way her father had taught her, because she understood that the greatest tribute she could offer him was not tears in front of his regiment, but dignity. And yet the grief was enormous, oceanic, pressing against her chest like a hand trying to push her underwater. But it was only after the ceremony, when the last of the officers had offered their condolences, and the crowd had thinned to a handful of relatives, standing in clusters around her mother, that Arjun walked toward her. He moved the way he always had, with a quiet deliberateness, as if each step was considered. He had not changed very much. A few more lines around his eyes, a new scar along his jaw that she didn't recognize, but the same steady presence that had once made her feel like the world was a safer place. He did not say he was sorry. He knew her well enough to know she didn't want that. Instead, he stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the grave, and he said that her father had written to him 6 months ago. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew. Her father had written to Arjun. He had told him, in the blunt and dignified language of a man who did not believe in elaborate emotion, that he had been wrong, that he had watched Nadia from a distance all these years, her postings, her promotions, the quiet loneliness she carried, and he had come to understand that the life he had chosen for himself was not the only right way to live a life in service, that two people who understood sacrifice might in fact be better equipped to love each other precisely because of it, not in spite of it. He had asked Arjun to look after her, not because she needed looking after, but because that was the only language he knew for asking someone to love his daughter. Nadia stood very still while Arjun told her this. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the clean winter sky above the hills, because she knew that if she looked at him, she would fall apart, and she had a whole regiment watching. But in the weeks that followed, the world moved forward the way it always does, indifferent, relentless, full of small obligations that demand your attention, even when your heart is cracked open. She returned to her posting. She filed reports and led drills, and ate dinner in the mess hall and responded to her mother's messages with the dutiful brevity of someone who knows that words are inadequate but sends them anyway. And every few nights Arjun called, not to say anything dramatic, just to talk, the way two people talk when they are slowly learning each other again after years of silence. He told her about his battalion, the absurd bureaucracy of army paperwork, a puppy one of his men had adopted and named Major Biscuit. She told him about the mountains, the impossible cold, the way the stars looked from Siachen on a clear night, as if someone had punched holes in the darkness and the light was pouring through. They did not speak about the past, about what had broken, about her father's disapproval, or the letters that went unanswered, or the long stretches of time when they had pretended not to miss each other. Some things cannot be addressed head-on. You approach them slowly, the way you approach a fire, grateful for the warmth, careful not to get burned again. But grief has a way of stripping away everything unnecessary. When you have stood at the edge of a grave and understood in your body, not just your mind, that time is not infinite and people are not permanent, the small calculations of pride become very difficult to maintain. Nadia had spent 3 years being careful. Careful not to reach out, careful not to hope, careful not to want something that her father had once told her was too complicated to want. But her father was gone now, and his last act had been to reach out to the person she had let go, which meant that even he, in the end, had understood what mattered. But she called Arjun on a Thursday evening from a satellite phone in a communications tent at the edge of the world. The wind outside was loud and the connection was imperfect, and she had to repeat herself twice. But she told him that she had read the letter. Her mother had sent her a copy, and that she thought they had both wasted enough time being sensible. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries more meaning than words. And then he laughed, a low, warm, relieved sound that she had not heard in 3 years, and had missed without fully knowing she had missed it. And he said that he had been waiting a long time for her to say something like that. It was not a fairy tale. Nothing about their lives allowed for fairy tales. They were both soldiers, which meant they would continue to be posted in different corners of the country, continue to go weeks without proper contact, continue to live with the particular loneliness and the particular pride of the life they had chosen. There would be no easy softness, no guaranteed safety, no promise that the night would never bring terrible news. They both understood this better than most people ever would, but they also understood something else, something that only people who have lost know with any real clarity, that love is not made fragile by difficulty, it is made meaningful by it. The love that survives distance and grief, and silence and stubbornness, is not weaker for having survived those things. It is forged by them the way steel is forged, harder, cleaner, more honest than it was before. But 6 months later, Nadia stood in front of a mirror in her dress uniform, minutes before a ceremony that had nothing to do with war. Her mother adjusted the medals on her chest with careful hands, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because they were both thinking of the same person. The man who had spent his whole life teaching her to be strong, and had finally, in his last months, remembered to teach her to be soft. She thought about everything she would tell her father if she could. She would tell him that she understood why he had been the way he was, that his sternness was just love wearing the only armor he knew. She would tell him that she had stopped being angry about the years she and Arjun had lost, because she believed now that they had needed those years to become people who could actually hold each other properly. And she would tell him, with the same directness he had always valued, that he had done a good thing by writing that letter, that it had been the bravest thing he had ever done, braver than any battlefield, because it had required him to admit he was wrong to someone he had never had to apologize to before. She did not say any of this out loud. She just pressed her hand over the medals for a moment, the way she had seen him do 1,000 times, and she straightened her shoulders, and she walked out into the light. But if this story moved something in you, if you believe in kindness, in love that survives the hardest seasons, in the quiet courage of people who serve and the even quieter courage of those who love them, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support means more than you know, and it helps this story reach the hearts that need it most. Before we close, and drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had someone come back into your life at exactly the right moment? Or has someone's love letter, spoken or unspoken, changed the direction of your story? We read every single comment. And your words always remind us why we tell these stories. But there are girls all over this country who wear uniforms and carry grief and love without ever speaking of it, who stand straight at funerals and cry only when no one is watching. This story is for them. This story has always been for them. They are not just daughters of the nation. They are its heart, beating quietly, endlessly, in the places where the roads end and the mountains begin, under stars so bright they look like promises, in the uniform of something much larger than themselves, loving, always loving, with the full weight of everything they are. Oh.